You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Ford,
Corey Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mott,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm super excited to have Liza Nash Taylor on the show with me today. She has a phenomenal new book. It's called Etiquette for Runaways. And what a great book this is, Liza. Thanks for joining me on the show today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. As I told you a minute ago, this is my first podcast, and I was so afraid that I was going to say, thank you for having me.
I've never heard that before.
No one's done that.
Of course they have. Of course they have. And it's all good fun. Liza, we begin each show with the same question. And that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Oh, that's a great question. I came to the writing game really late in the game. I started writing at 53, and I'm 60 now. But I was always an avid reader, and growing up in Virginia in the summer heat, I was never very athletic. And when I was 6, I learned to knit, and I became that geeky girl who makes patchwork quilts and cross-stitch samplers for fun. And then that led on to a career in fashion design. But along the way, I loved reading, and I loved going to the library in the summer because they had air conditioning and we didn't. And I loved everything by Frances Hodgson Burnett. I loved The Secret Garden, really spurred, I think, my love of gardening, and A Little Princess. And I developed this longing to be an abandoned English orphan, and that carried through with a love of English literature and reading that transitioned once my youngest went to high school into my wanting to go back to school and study about literature. And my third semester in, I had a choice between something along the lines of the literature of the Restoration, which made me want to weep with anticipatory boredom. And the other class, the other class was the writing of fiction. And from there was no going back.
Liza, I'm fascinated by the intersection of different artistic expressions and storytelling, if we want to use that in a broad sense. You would think of fashion designing and storytelling as a novel writing. You would think on the surface that those things have no connection at all. But fashion even can have a bit of storytelling about it. Do you see a connection in the different artistic expressions that you have been involved in?
Oh, another really good question. I mean, would they both start when you're knitting something or designing something? You start with a pattern, or else you're draping it on a dress form, on a mannequin. So that almost, or else you start doing it mathematically, like designing the pattern, and that almost equates to, are you a pantser or a plotter writer? And so, yeah, I think that there is crossover.
Do you remember what the first book that you read that completely transported you and made you feel like you lived in a different time or in a different place and cared about the characters?
Again, I probably have to go back to The Secret Garden. Yeah. I think I'll just stick with that. I think I would say
what
that.
Was it about The Secret Garden that made you want to be there?
Well, there was something so magical to me about England and the roses and the brick walls and the old mansion house with the leaded glass windows and the canopy beds. And, I don't know. It all just so appealed to me. I've always loved old things better than new things. And maybe that was why.
Was there ever a time where there was a person of influence, maybe it was a parent, maybe it was a teacher or something, who recognized that you might have this storytelling gene and that encouraged you?
Well, yes, as I said, I was late to the party, and I decided after taking my first class that if I really wanted to get somewhere with this, I had really better catch up fast. So I took a year-long novel class with the novelist Mary Baldwin, which was fabulous. And then I applied to Vermont College of Fine Arts to get an MFA. And I finished that in 2018. And I had some wonderful teachers. The novelist Connie Mae Fowler was, I'd attended a conference where she was my advisor, and she really encouraged me. And I said, Connie, I'm too old to start this. And, I don't know what I'm doing. And she said, no, you can learn. And I trusted that.
I love it. So you said that you began writing in your 50s. What was it that, after having this career and being involved in the fashion industry and different aspects, what was it about writing that came back around to you?
Well, Hank, I'm a big believer that as we move through life, and I went through living in New York, then I lived in Nantucket for 7 years and one marriage, and I've been in Virginia, where I'm from, for 25 years. And I think as we move through life, we can't continue to be to let our roles identify us. So I'm all about evolving and finding the next creative thing. And once I was at a point where I didn't have to work full time, I was excited to try to come up with something new. So I thought I would just try different things. So that's sort of how I fell into it.
What was the first story idea that you had that kind of wouldn't leave you alone? That tends to happen sometimes, where we get an idea for something and it grows and it grows and it grows. Do you remember what the first thing was? Maybe it was published, maybe it wasn't, that just wouldn't leave you alone?
Well, it was this novel, and I'll tell you the story of that.
I love it.
When I started in 2013 taking the class I was just telling you about, yeah. I had very recently broken my right ankle. So I was stuck at home for 8 weeks in a cast, and I had started this novel. And the first, there are 3 decisions a writer has to make before getting started, and those would be setting and character and time period. So here I am stuck at my house, and my house was built about 1830. It's a white clapboard Virginia farmhouse. And I looked around me. I was sitting on the porch. The cicadas were screaming, as they are right now. And I looked out at the Southwest mountains, and I thought, starting this novel right here where I'm sitting in this house. And I can look at the mountains and see the mist coming up through the evergreens in the morning and smell the newly mown hay right out my back door. And so that was a pretty easy decision. Oops, there they go. Sorry.
That's okay.
Okay. I'm sorry, I forgot where I was.
You were looking at the mountains.
Yeah. So the first story that came to me. So I thought, I'm going to start this novel right here. And then I had to come up with my character. And there are 2 things that influenced the development of Mae Marshall. The first was that shortly before I broke my ankle, I had finished reading Daniel Defoe's 1722 novel, Moll Flanders. Have you read it?
I have not.
Well, he wrote that 100 years before Jane Austen wrote her novels. And Moll Flanders was an 18th century badass. I just loved her. I'm sorry, I hope I can say that.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
She came from nothing. She was born in prison. Her mother was a prostitute and pled her belly, which means she avoided being executed because she was pregnant. Now, as Moll came of age, people tried to take advantage of her, especially men. And Moll was bright and she was wily and she managed to get ahead and she managed to get even and she didn't always follow the rules. And I really liked that about her. And then the other thing that inspired Mae Marshall, my character, was I told you my house is old. And when we dig around in the dirt, we find shards of pottery and antique bottles and rusty horseshoes and things. And I found in my garden a broken piece of a Victorian era doll's face. And it was kind of creepy, but very cool. And I thought, I wonder whose doll this was. And how did it end up broken in the dirt? Did her older brother throw it down the stairs, which is what would have happened in my house growing up? Or, did she just outgrow dolls? So I had this piece of pottery from my property, and I thought, I am going to tell the story of the little girl who loved this doll.
Want to grow as a writer and take your writing to the next level? Give ProWritingAid a try. ProWritingAid is a grammar checker, style editor, and writing mentor in one package. ProWritingAid will never replace a human editor. Rather, it helps you self-edit to a deeper level so that when you send it off to an editor, they will be able to focus on the meat of your writing and not spend their time fixing basic writing issues. ProWritingAid is the only platform that offers world-class grammar and style checking combined with more in-depth reports to help you strengthen your writing. Our unique combination of suggestions, articles, videos, and quizzes makes writing fun and interactive. Writing can be grammatically perfect but still feel awkward and clumsy. ProWritingAid searches out elements like repetitiveness, vague wording, sentence length variation, overdependence on adverbs, passive voice, overcomplicated sentence structures, and so much more. Nothing makes a writer lose credibility faster than spelling and grammar mistakes. Submit clean, error-free writing. Go to ProWritingAid.com and use code HANK20 for 20% off of ProWritingAid Premium. ProWritingAid. Check it out today.
I love it. So, was there were there writing classes? What was it that I think that you went back to college later in life? Do I have that right?
Well, I got a degree in art in 1981, and then I went to graduate school in New York in fashion design, and then I worked for Ralph Lauren after that. So, as I said, when my daughter went to high school, I just started taking classes. That was right when you could start taking classes on the computer. And I took an amazing class from Harvard called Crime and Horror in Victorian Literature and Culture. And so I started just taking odd classes and loving it. And then I decided I really needed to get the MFA, and buckle down and invest in this.
I love it. So what was it about the MFA program, or what was it about this first literature class that kind of sparked this want to write? There are lots of things that can spark our desire to read and to fall into other people's stories, but there's something very specific about feeling like there's a story inside you that you want to tell.
You are so right. And I can only assume that other novelists get this call much earlier on or born with it. I love hearing people say, I wrote my first story when I was 5 years old. That wasn't my path. But I started this novel and sort of worked on it and put it away and took another class and worked on it some more with a different teacher. And I started experimenting with flash fiction and short stories. And the first thing I had published was an essay in a literary magazine. And then I had a a flash piece published in an anthology by the Harvard Bookstore. And just seeing, I will never forget the feeling of receiving that beautiful little book in my hands and seeing my name in print and seeing my words. And, that is very enticing and it's very addictive once you get a taste of that. So that kind of got me on the road.
Absolutely. So, you said that you wrote some essays, but this story was kind of wouldn't leave you alone. How long did you work on this book?
Oh, probably 5 years. And I would say it's been through so many revisions, so many drafts to get to where it is now. As I started at the beginning of my MFA program, I signed on with one agent. And for a year, we worked on the story. And then we sort of came to loggerheads where we didn't agree on where the plot should go. And we broke up and it was heartbreaking. And I still think the world of her. And then it took almost a year to find my second current agent. And then the book went out. So it took a while, but it's not like I sat down and just wrote 360 pages. It was a matter of stopping and learning and going back into it and starting at the beginning and plugging in what I was learning along the way. And I became very dissatisfied with what I'd done before, and my standards kept going up and up and up. But that was such a good thing, because I felt like I was making progress and I was learning.
What was it about this time period that intrigued you so much?
Oh, I love the 1920s. I mean, we all think of it, I guess, as, people dancing the Charleston in a flapper dress with bobbed hair, but there's a lot more to it than that. And of course, I love the fashion. When I worked for Ralph Lauren, I used to go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art Costume Institute and make sketches from old fashion plates and things like that and bring them back. And one of the things I researched was the photography of Jacques-Henri Lartigue, who took the photograph on my cover. And I would gather these things, and I just love Art Deco. But the main reason I narrowed it down to the 1920s in Albemarle County, Virginia, was because it was Prohibition, and there were a lot of moonshiners in this area. And nearby Franklin County, Virginia, was called the moonshine capital of the world at that time.
I'm always fascinated by how place informs the writing and the finished product of a book. How do you feel like Virginia and the place where you're from influences this book?
Well, as I said, starting the book here at the house where I live, I had access to the scenery, obviously. So it's great for sensory details in that regard. But I did a lot of research. The Albemarle Historical Society was a good source. And then when the story moves on in part 2 to New York and in part 3 to Paris, in both instances, I used as settings places that I knew and had either lived or visited, except for the New York Biltmore Hotel, because that was torn down. But yes, place and bringing in sensory details is so important to me.
What was it about this time period? I know that there's so much intrigue about the 1920s, but we are 100 years past 1920 now at 2020, and there's lots of jokes about here come the roaring 20s again. But looking back now and ignore the complete dumpster fire that is 2020 so far with a worldwide pandemic and all this stuff. But how do you feel like that our life now in 2020 could be reminiscent of 100 years ago?
Well, I'll tell you what I'm finding interesting is I'm doing research right now for my second novel that comes out next year, and it's set in 1932 during the Great Depression. And there are some sort of frightening parallels economically to what it was going on then and what's going on now. But the 20s was a time of upheaval. It was after the war, after the First World War. People were kicking up their heels. Women were cutting off their hair and stopping wearing corsets, and they got the right to vote. So, it was a progressive time. And I know that we're making progress now. And I think in hindsight, we'll be able to look back on this year and say that something good came out of it. I'm not exactly sure what that's going to be. But the 20s was, there was a lot going on. And I was surprised that there was a lot more violence. I mean, we know there was racial violence, and there were gangsters, all having to do with bootlegging and moonshining. Do you know the difference between a bootlegger and a moonshiner?
I do, but tell the audience.
Noveler is the best way to write a novel. Why? Quite simply because we've made it the easiest place to do it. Writing a novel is hard enough. Noveler takes care of all the logistical bits of writing a novel, just leaving that small matter of the words to you. It's a clean, beautiful writing interface with writing analytics, goals and streaks, advanced grammar checking, version control, day, evening, and night modes, and many other features designed to take all the stress out of writing. Tell us what you need and we'll build it. Together, we'll build a better tool. With a design-led approach, all the right tools that you need, Noveler saves all your words constantly, allows you to manage and order your novel easily. It's accessible from any device, desktop or mobile. It syncs to Google Drive and Dropbox. It allows exports in various formats, including ebook and more. It also has nice touches like allowing you to write both offline and online, unique for a web-based platform. Everyone needs help with their writing, from inspiration through to grammar checking, so we're doing our best to provide that support. We integrate that support directly into Noveler. Our advanced grammar checker powered by ProWritingAid does everything from spell check to style advice. Our writing courses include the incredible Tim Clare's Couch to ADK. We're really excited to offer all Author Stories listeners 30% off Noveler for a whole year. And it doesn't matter if you choose to sign up for the monthly or annual plan. You'll get 30% off. All you need to do is use the discount code HANK when you sign up. Noveler, Novlr. That's noveler.org.
Oh, okay. Well, I kind of use those terms interchangeably until I really started doing research. And a bootlegger illegally imports legally produced spirits like Canadian whiskey or French champagne, and then sells it on the black market, or else they're selling stock that has been hidden to avoid prohibition agents and then is being sold on the black market. And a moonshiner actually makes the apparatus and uses corn or whatever, and they produce the illegal liquor themselves. So when you see your basic mason jar full of clear liquid, that is that's what we think of when we say moonshine.
Right. The title of this book is provocative. What does Etiquette for Runaways mean, and how does that tie into the story?
Oh yes, well it wasn't the first title, but that is like a really long story. I'm not going to tell you. So when I'm doing research, I like to read novels and periodicals that are contemporaneous to the period I'm writing about. And so in this case, 1924 to 26. And I look in my own library and I buy old books and magazines on eBay. And one turned out to be the source of this title. I bought a 1922 edition, the very first year it was produced, of Emily Post's Guide to Manners called Etiquette in Society, in Business, in Politics, and at Home. And in my imagination, May would have gotten a copy of this for her high school graduation. And through the novel, she refers back to it and thinks, WWED, what would Emily do? So that was where the title came from.
I love it. What might surprise readers about this book? What was one of the most fun things for you to uncover that maybe you didn't know about as a writer?
Let me think. I love it when I'm researching and I find these little Easter eggs of information, and sometimes they're just a little aside, and sometimes they can really turn the plot on its axis. And I found out about a trial called the Great Moonshine Conspiracy Trial of 1935 that happened in Franklin County, Virginia. And what happened was a ring of crooked officials were shaking down small local moonshiners for protection money, when in fact the governor of Virginia had decreed that they should only fine small operators and spend their time going after the big guys, because the court docket system of Virginia was so backed up and the jails were full. So I was able to take that trial and move it ahead to 1924. And though I don't go into the trial, I did use the plot line of the crooked sheriff. And another Easter egg was coming across the details of Josephine Baker's debut in Paris in 1925 at the Théâtre des Champs-Élysées in Les Revue Nègre. And I was originally going to use Miss Baker as a character, as a secondary character. I would not write from her perspective, but I ended up changing it to a character inspired by Josephine Baker. And in that way, I was able to manipulate time, whereas if I had used Josephine Baker, I would be constrained by the timeline of her life and her background. So I named my character Janie. She is an African-American showgirl from New York who becomes a star in Paris. And I named my Janie after Janie from Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston, which is one of my very favorite books and my #1 audiobook of all time.
When as the novel heats up, there's some drama that happens, and May goes on the run from rural Virginia, and she winds up in New York City. Nowadays, because of the internet and TV and things like that, our world seems to have gotten smaller, and there are those of us who maybe have never been to New York but could recognize landmarks and can understand different aspects of the culture and how they may vary from our part of the world, and familiarize ourselves with it. But in 1920, New York City may have just been like a foreign land. How would May have responded to a new place like New York in 1920?
Well, that's a great observation, Hank. Yes, she's never been to New York. She arrives on the train. It's late August. It's hot and sticky, and she doesn't know where she's going. She doesn't know the name. She's been given the name of a hotel, and she goes to the Allerton Hotel, which turns out to be a hotel only for gentlemen. And then she's referred from there to the Allerton House, which is a hotel for women only. And so she sort of spends this first day stumbling around, not knowing where she's going. And, in that day and age, I think a young person kind of could disappear and not really be found, and changed their name successfully. So she stumbles into Grand Central Terminal and gets an iced tea and reads a newspaper, and then that leads her into the Biltmore Hotel, which is no longer there, the New York Biltmore. And it's air conditioned, and she thinks it's so luxurious. And she goes into the ladies' room and almost faints from hunger. And this lovely attendant there gives her some tea sandwiches and pushes her out the door and says, "You need to go get a room. You know, it's 7 o'clock." So she stays in the Biltmore, even though she can't afford it. And she's never been so high. She's on the 20th floor, and she's never been that high. So what was fun about it was thinking of trying to be in her shoes, of seeing a skyscraper for the first time, of watching all of the traffic on 7th Avenue and finding your way from A to B, and walking into, anyone who's ever walked into Grand Central Terminal for the first time, it is awesome. You know, the beautiful ceiling and all of the hubbub of people coming and going. So I'm sure, I intend that it was very overwhelming and a little frightening. And she kind of stopped and wondered, what on earth have I done?
All of us have something in our lives that we would prefer that stays buried, and let the past be the past, and we don't want to deal with it. One great thing about this book is that May has one of those secrets, and it just won't stay buried, will it?
Are you speaking about her mother, or?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. May's mother left the family when May was 7, shortly after the death of her infant brother. And her father will not talk about the mother, and she has no details. All she has is this fragment of a porcelain doll's face. And her father won't let her keep anything. She doesn't know if her mother ever wrote to her. So when she leaves home, she determines that she does get a hint that her mother had gone to Paris. When she ends up in Paris, she does everything she can to find her mother through, passport records and the embassy and so forth. And she finds out a little. I don't want to have any spoilers, but what she ends up finding is not what she'd hoped, and about as bad as it could be. And she makes a choice to protect others from that information. And that was maybe one of her most mature, to me, that was sort of a milestone in her really thinking like an adult and learning to think of others, before herself.
Well, the new book is called Etiquette for Runaways. It's available everywhere now. Happy launch, by the way, a couple of days ago. It's available in Kindle edition and hardback and audio book. Liza, when people finish this book and get to the end of it and close that back cover, what do you hope they're left with?
Ooh, well, I didn't tie up the ending in a nice bow. I hope that they'll be wondering what's next for May, and I hope that they'll end up feeling her journey to self-respect and her growth. And I hope that they'll be looking forward to reading the standalone sequel that's coming next year on August 10th from Blackstone Publishing.
Excellent. We will look for it everywhere. There's links in the show notes of this episode where you can pick up your copy of Etiquette for Runaways. Liza, if people want to connect with you online, where's a great place to do that?
Well, I'd love to hear from you all through my website, LizaNashTaylor.com. I'd love to hear from book clubs. And you can find me on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter. All of them are Liza Nash Taylor. And yeah, I'd love to hear from readers and connect with everyone.
Excellent. We'll put links to the website in the show notes where people can find you. Liza, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show today.
Well, Hank, thank you for making my first podcast a really, really pleasant experience. I so appreciate this opportunity.
Scribophile is a respectful online writing workshop and writers community. Writers of all skill levels join to improve each other's work with thoughtful critiques and by sharing their writing experiences. We're the writing group to join if you want to find beta readers, get the best feedback around, learn how to get published, and be a part of the friendliest and most successful writing workshop online. Improve your writing by receiving detailed critiques. Learn from a vast collection of free writing resources. Make lifelong friends in our busy community of writers. Writing is a solitary art, but that doesn't mean you have to be lonely. Lucky for you, there are thousands of writers on Scribophile every day, and we're a really friendly bunch. You've never seen a writing group like this one? Join Scribophile today at scribophile.community.